Yeah, so as Ian said, I'm in the Department of Psychology at Edinburgh, and I'm interested in how education works. And a few months ago, this is going to seem like a complete non sequitur. A few months ago, I went to see Elvis Costello. Any fans in the room? Yeah, very good. And he does this thing where he doesn't actually prepare a set list in advance for his gig. He doesn't, set out which songs are going to come first and whatever. He just lets the audience come up and spin a wheel and choose which song they want to hear, and the band just play it, right? And I thought, that's a great idea for a talk. So what I'm going to do is I've got loads of little talks that last 5-10 minutes, and there's a page where at the start where there's no wheel or anything, but you can choose which one you want to hear. I'll take requests, and I'll go through them. And you could say this is a really exciting way of engagement with the audience or whatever, or you could say it's because I don't have enough material to last an hour on any particular one subject. So these are the questions about education, right? They're a varied bunch here. So we've got, does going to school make you smarter? Can neuroscience inform educational practice? What are the genes that are involved in educational success? Do learning styles exist? Do they matter? Does class size matter? Always an important thing for elections, and politicians always comes up a lot. Does teacher quality matter? And did the grammar schools that we used to have in the UK improve social mobility? And obviously the converse, did getting rid of them reduce the social mobility of our society? So I essentially will take which do you want to hear first? Just put up your hand and I'll yes. Go from the top. Well, this is why he has a wheel, I think. Anyway, okay, right, let's go from the top. Does going to school make you smarter? See, I can click them here. I've got a clever little PowerPoint thing. Look at that. This is a question which everyone seems to think is obvious. When I say to people, do you think going to school makes you smarter? People study this. People take it as very, very obvious. Well, yeah, of course it does. But there are problems with that kind of reasoning, and of course they're the basic thing that everyone in the Skeptics Society knows, which is that a correlation isn't causation. So obviously, being smart, i.e. scoring highly on IQ tests, is correlated very strongly with the length of time you spend in school. But of course the problem with that is, well, there we go. The problem is that it could be the fact that being smart makes you stay long in school, being smart innately or for other reasons makes you stay for longer, or it could be that schooling actually adds IQ points onto your score, improves your intelligence. And so actually just taking that basic correlation doesn't really tell us anything about this. And so we need to try and answer a causal question. We need to say, is this causing this, or is this causing this? Is schooling actually doing something to your IQ? So I just want to discuss one little study which came out. Actually, it was quite a big study. It was in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, which is, as you will know, one of the top scientific journals. This was in 2012, and it's called "Schooling in Adolescence Raises IQ Scores." I guess it's a pretty obvious, a pretty clear title. What they did was, in Norway in the 1960s, I think this was, there was an educational reform by the government where the government required schools to add on a couple of extra years of education, and it was compulsory for people to stay on longer. And the beautiful thing about this is that this happened in a kind of staggered way. So in some municipalities in Norway, the year was added, and in others it was added later. So you have a kind of a staggered time where there's some kids who are just able to get out of education when they want, and some kids who would have left at, say, 14 or 16 or whatever the age was, but were forced to stay on a little bit longer. And that's the thing, right? That is a natural experiment. It's not just a correlational study. It's actually something which we couldn't really do if we wanted to, i.e. we couldn't set up an experiment which forced parents to make their kids stay in school for longer. Everyone would complain that was unethical. We might discuss that later. I think it's probably unethical not to do research, but anyway. And they were able to test the effects of on IQ, because everyone in Norway, and this is actually only a study of males, every male in Norway goes and joins the army to do their compulsory national service, military service. And everyone gets an IQ test when they do that. And it turned out that in the schools where they had added these extra years of education on and forced the kids to stay, the kids actually took on about I think it's 3.6 IQ points per extra year of school. And there was some kind of complex econometric modeling that they did there. These people are economists rather than psychologists. And so they were able to answer this question, which is a kind of a correlational mess, in a really nice causal way. And they said, yes, it is actually causal. If you force people to stay in school, they will gain about 3.6 IQ points per year. Now, of course, the question is, what is actually happening there? Is it that if you teach kids how to do maths, it helps them with their IQ? Is it that kids just learning about general knowledge increases their IQ? Is it some specific thing that we're doing in school that increases kids' IQ? And again, how would we know that? How can we get around this problem of just going to a school and measuring loads of stuff and correlating it all together, like a lot of research, sadly, a lot of research does? Well, one way to get around it is to use twins. And I'm going to go on and on and on in this talk, if you select the relevant questions anyway, about twins and how twins are amazingly useful for any social science research. You cannot be doing social science research if you haven't got twins. That's probably a little bit of an overstatement, but essentially, that is my opinion. Identical twins, of course, share all their genes in common. If they were brought up in the same family, then they share their socioeconomic status, they share the neighborhood, they share the amenities that were around, all that sort of stuff. And so the wonderful thing you can do is you can, this is one of my papers that we've got currently under review, you can see whether the twin who is a little bit better at some activity, and in this case we actually focused on reading, is for purely non-shared environmental reasons, that is, reasons that are not to do with their parents, reasons that are not to do with their socioeconomic status, reasons that are due to something that they have but their twin doesn't, is going to be better at doing intelligence tests at a later time, and that's controlling for earlier IQ tests. So there's this thing, this is a cross-lagged panel design, it's very exciting, I get really excited about these things, but maybe you don't. But the point is, we were able to see whether reading has a causal effect on intelligence because we've controlled for absolutely everything else. So does twin A, who maybe can read a few extra words, controlling for how smart they are, do they actually do better than twin B on an intelligence test later? And it turns out that yes, they actually do. It turns out we get a statistically significant effect, and we find that being better at reading causally leads you to be better at intelligence later, controlling for how smart you were in the first place. So it seems like there are particular skills, like reading, that we can teach people that will improve their general ability, that is, their ability to perform on IQ tests. I know a few years ago, maybe, is it years ago now, that you had a talk from Ian Deary here on intelligence tests, so you'll know how important an IQ score is. And we thought this was quite an interesting study, and this is coming out soon. I can, if anyone's interested, I can send you the paper. And in fact, that goes for anything I'm going to talk about tonight. If you're interested in it, I can forward you on the paper, and we'll just not ask any questions about whether it's legal to send people papers when they haven't bothered. Okay, so here's the question: does going to school make you smarter? Yes, and the important thing I want you to get across here is that you have to try and investigate things in causal ways. So using natural experiments and using twins, it seems like being in school for longer improves people's IQ score. It's about 4 IQ points per year. Some other studies have found less than that, but you're somewhere in the region of 1 to 4 IQ points per year, and it might be specifically that reading has something to do with that. So we're done with this particular question, and I can use my, there we go. I was paranoid that it would take me somewhere else. What's next?
Grammar schools.
Grammar schools.
Yeah.
Gentleman at the back there. Just go down to the old grammar schools one. So here is a rather thorny question. Did the grammar school system that we used to have in the UK improve the life chances of poor kids that went there? Did it really, or did getting rid of it reduce the social mobility that we have in society? So obviously this is a bit of a minefield. A lot of people get very upset when you mention grammar schools and 11 plus tests and all this kind of thing. Not all the time, but in I think a majority of cases, after the 1944 Butler Act in the UK, there was a selective school system, and obviously this was massively controversial, but the kids who were able to pass the 11 plus test, which was an IQ test, a general ability test, were sent to grammar school, whereas the other kids were sent to secondary modern school. That's somewhat of an oversimplification, but that's basically the system that we used to have. And obviously this was controversial. People said it was elitist, and it was bad for kids because the rich kids tended to do better on the test because their parents could give them tutors and so on to help them get through the test, and the poor kids were at a disadvantage. So the question is, did going to this to a grammar school as opposed to a comprehensive system that we have now help people get out of the lower social classes and up into the upper social classes if they had the ability? So this is the kind of idea of meritocracy, so that people who are talented will rise up to the top, and they should in a system that allows them to and doesn't force them down. So here's a paper. This is a paper in the British Journal of Sociology, which caused a lot of discussion at the time. This is in 2011. I don't know if you've seen this one. Just going to focus on this one paper. This is of a very important data sample that we have in the UK called the National Child Development Study. And it's every child who was born within 1 week of April 1958. It's about 18,000 people. And they've been followed at various points through their life right up until now. They're now getting genetic testing and all sorts of things like that. But one of the things one of the areas they looked at was education and also their social class. So that is how much money they had, what sort of job they were doing. So we've got a lot of data on a lot of people. And these guys, Bolivar and Swift, were able to test right across the whole lifespan whether going to a comprehensive school increased or decreased your chances of staying in the same class that you started off in, or getting up or getting down, depending on your ability. So here's an exciting table from their paper. Now, all of this is controlling for what they call propensity scores. That is controlling for ability, right? So we already know that the kids who went to grammar school were the ones that passed the 11 plus test, so we're probably what we may call smarter, I guess. We're trying not to be too controversial. And so just forget about all that. This is all trying to statistically equalize all that. Does someone from the lowest quartile, that is the lowest socioeconomic area, get up to the highest one? What are their chances of that? Now you can see here that these numbers are odds ratios. So if they're above 1, that means that the chances were increased, and if they're below 1, that means the chances were decreased. So just to explain, if you went to a grammar school and you were from the lowest quartile of socioeconomic origin, you have an increased chance of getting to the very highest level of society if you went there. Whereas if you went to a secondary modern school, you've got a little bit less of a chance of getting there, although a little bit higher. If you were in the highest socioeconomic quartile and you went to grammar school, you'll find around about the same level of you're just about as likely to stay in your high class. But you're actually more likely to end up in the second quartile destination. That is, it seems to be that the kids who are lower, who are starting from a poorer background, are actually better off if they go to a grammar school. Now, this is quite interesting because this is not what a lot of people say. They say, obviously, rich people, they afford the tutors, they can get through. Just having a look at this, this is splitting it into 3. This is splitting into working class, intermediate class, and service class. This kind of sociological way of demarcating the socioeconomic status. You can see here that going to a grammar school when you were working class gives you and this star is for statistical significance, a far increased chance of getting out of the working class and into a service class destination, but no such effect in the service class. That is, you're just about as likely to stay where you are. And in fact, you're less likely to end up when you start in the service class in a working class destination. But if you go to a secondary modern, the chances of when you're working class and when you're service class are just about the same. So actually, what they conclude is there is a mobility advantage accruing to children from low income or working class origins. when you go to grammar school. Grammar school is doing something. It's lifting kids out. It's giving them the skills or the connections or whatever it is that they need to rise up through the social ranks. However, the problem is that this secondary modern system is giving kids a disadvantage. That is, there's something about the secondary modern system. Maybe it's the fact the teachers aren't very good. Maybe it's the fact the subjects aren't particularly interesting. Maybe it's that they don't give you the particular skills that you need to get on in life, whatever it happens to be. And that's actually making kids suffer. It's making them more likely to either stay where they are. So if you're working class and you go to a secondary modern, you're more likely to stay in your working class origin than move up and be socially mobile. So they say grammar school's good, but the accompanying system actually brought them down. So actually we ended up with a kind of a block on social mobility because of that. To me, this sounds like grammar schools were a good idea, but we need to sort out what's going on with the other kids, right? So if you look at the example of countries like Germany, for instance, where no one complains that Germany is, a terribly class-based society. I don't think like they do about the UK. They have a selective school system. So do several other Scandinavian countries, for instance, and they don't just dump their kids into terrible, crumbling secondary modern schools that don't pass the 11 plus. They actually go to vocational colleges and so on, and they aren't looked down upon in the same way as the secondary moderns were in the UK at the time. So, in answer to this particular question, did grammar schools improve social mobility? Yes, but the accompanying system reduced social mobility. So actually, you've got to be very careful with what you do with the kids who are not academically inclined, would be the answer, at least from this paper, which I thought was quite an interesting one and a really good data set. So, back to the screen. What's next?
Class size.
What?
Class size.
Class size. You're not allowed to. You're the organizer. But someone else said class size. Let's do class size. Okay, does class size matter? Here's one that you hear all the time. Politicians' manifestos will reduce class sizes to, I think the SNP promised 18 if they became the government at the last Scottish election. A maximum of 18 in the class. And this is the research on class size. It's a complete morass. It's a total tangle. You look up class size, and this is what you get. You get papers that say it helps, papers that say it doesn't, papers that say there's nothing going on, papers that say it makes things worse. It's a complete disaster. So basically, what I'm going to do is talk you through a few of these studies and draw no conclusion from them. So, is it the case that smaller class equals better outcomes? Now, you kind of think intuitively, well, the teacher has more time with each kid in the class, and so they're going to be able to spend more one-on-one tutoring, teach them how to read, teach them how to do maths, whatever. There's a paper in 1997, this is a very, very famous one, by Hanashek, which concluded, after looking at all the evidence, that actually there was no consistent improvement in achievement when class size was reduced. And this is looking at studies right across the world in a lot of different contexts. And so that was the kind of the big controversial thing that happened in 1997. This paper came out. However, Kruger came back in 2002 and said there were several problems with it. That, for instance, Hanashek had not weighted the studies, so he had counted studies that had really big sample sizes, exactly the same as studies that had little tiny sample sizes, and there were various kind of statistical problems. And actually, once you worked all those statistical problems out, being in a smaller class did end up having a better outcome on your better effects on your outcomes, on your learning. Here's a more recent one from 2009. They pointed out a problem which people don't really think of, which is having smaller classes means having more teachers, right? Because you've got to have more teachers to go around all the kids. The potential trade-off they talk about is between teacher quality and class size. More teachers means employing people who are not necessarily the best, the cream of the crop teachers. And so it might actually be the case that more teachers equal poorer teachers, and if you're having more and more tiny little classes and having to have more and more teachers, the overall quality of teachers in your country goes down. And they provided some evidence from that from the US. And so that was in 2009. And since then, there's just been an unbelievable number of studies on this. You get lost in it. Here's just a few examples of that. Here's a paper from 2010. In Florida, there's a mandatory class size reduction, so another one of these natural experiments where the government forces things to happen rather than you just sort of looking at what happened over time. They actually found there was basically zero effect on children's, I think, reading and maths. Here's another one from 2012. No consistent evidence for or against smaller classes in Hong Kong, so it didn't have a bad effect, it didn't have a good effect. In Hong Kong, reducing the class size had absolutely zero effect. Here's another one from 2012. This is across several different countries. The class size effects were there, so having a smaller class was better, but they were actually pretty small, and they were smaller as teachers got better and better. So it looks like being a better teacher, at least in this study, meant that you could do the same. You could get the same outcomes with a larger class. Here's one from 2013. From Japan, the effects were found only in younger years, so older kids being in a smaller class didn't seem to matter that much. So maybe it's the case that it's only working in for teaching basic skills like reading, where you really have to do one-on-one tuition, and then for the rest of development, kids can operate in a larger class with no penalties. But there was no effect on the achievement gap among schools. Here's another paper from 2013. This one was massively positive. This one was in Sweden just this year, and the effects last, and they actually tracked kids all the way till they were 42, and it turned out that kids who were in smaller classes, this is controlling for various socioeconomic variables, the kids who were in smaller classes by age 42, at age, I think it was 7, or when they were very young, turned out to have higher wages at age 42. They tended to do better in life. And that this was actually a cost-effective policy, i.e., reducing the classes and that extra cost that it costs to employ more teachers was actually effective if you count the fact that these kids are getting a really big benefit out of it. So when I look at all that, I think the answer to this question is generally maybe. The effects, however, tend to be pretty small. I haven't really seen many studies that make a big deal of class size and say it's very it's a majorly positive thing and it has huge effects. And this certainly isn't consistent in the literature, as you can see. And there may be this unintended consequence of having to employ more teachers and kind of dilute the pool of teaching talent. So why is it then that politicians are obsessed with this? Well, of course, the first reason we know, and this is another thing that the Skeptics Society, this kind of thing comes up a lot, people love magic bullets, right? We love to think that there's one thing we can do that just would boost everyone's achievement right across the board, and it's great, and it's such a simple thing to do, just simply take some kids out of one class, make a smaller class. Well, it doesn't really seem like it works that way. Also, there might be a little bit of pressure from teaching unions on politicians to make this happen. Oh, don't mention the teaching unions. Turn the camera off. But yeah, that might be one thing. Yes?
Presumably there is an optimum class size, and it might be the case that is smaller for younger years.
It could be, yes. So that's one thing you can take out of this, that it seemed to be the case that in a couple of those studies, younger kids seem to benefit more from class size reduction than older kids did. But again, it's a tiny little effect. It really doesn't seem to be anything super, as I say, it doesn't seem to be a magic bullet. But yeah, that's a good point. Okay, no, that's a different one. We have to go back. There we go. Right, what's next? Learning styles. Double learning styles, okay. So this is another popular one. Learning styles. This is what I'm talking about here, the visual, auditory, or physical or kinesthetic learning style. People talk about, I'm a visual learner, I'm an auditory learner, I'm a kinesthetic learner. This is used in, I would say, the majority of schools that I have had any contact with over my PhD, and there's been a few. A survey done, I think, last year showed that 94% of teachers in the UK agree with the statement that individuals learn better when they receive information in their preferred learning style, e.g. auditory, visual, kinesthetic. Yeah, sorry, this year, 2013. And I think they also surveyed teachers in the Netherlands, and it was about 95% or around about that. So this is the vast, vast, vast majority of teachers believe this. And what do they believe? Well, visual learners learn best through seeing, need to see the teacher's body language and facial expressions. They may prefer sitting in the front of the classroom in order to see more clearly. They learn best from diagrams. Auditory learners, they enjoy listening. They learn best through lectures, discussions. They benefit from reading aloud. Physical learners may become distracted by the need for activity, may find it hard to sit still for long periods. I guess that sounds like quite a lot of kids. But anyway, the idea here is that there is a taxonomy of learning styles that you can fit children into. And the really critical thing here is that teaching them in the right way will boost their learning. And teaching them in the wrong way, so if you taught a visual learner in a kinesthetic style, that would have a detrimental effect on how much they learn. So 94% of teachers in the UK agree with this. Wouldn't it be terrible if it was all bullshit? Well, here's a paper from the journal, the very good journal, Psychological Science in the Public Interest. This is a journal which provides long, in-depth monograph reviews of the literature, and it's freely available to the public, so I don't even have to illegally send you it if you request it. And they asked in 2008 what kind of evidence would show that these learning styles were real and that they were useful. Well, it would have to be evidence that looked something like any of these three graphs here. So this is the learning method that optimized the test score of one kind of learner is different from the learning method that optimized the test score of the other kind of learner. So you see here's A-style learners, so maybe this is visual learners, and they're being taught with method 1, which is maybe the visual learning style, whatever that happens to be, an emphasis on teachers' body language and stuff. And they do really well, whereas the B-style learners, who maybe are kinesthetic, don't do very well. However, when those kinesthetic learners are taught with method 2, the kinesthetic style, they do better, whereas the visual kids who are taught with that kinesthetic style, it's a disaster. Their learning goes right down. And you can see a similar kind of effect in these graphs. One learning style is better for one particular classification of kids, and it's worse, and it's worse for the other classification. So it really would have to be this kind of crossover graph where you're good with one style and you're bad with the other. It would not, however, have to be anything like this. So here's some graphs from possible experiments that you could do, the results of these experiments that would show that in all these cases, method 1 is the best way to learn, right? So no matter whether you're an A-style learner or you're a B-style learner, method 1 is always best. And no matter whether you're visual or kinesthetic, the visual style is always best, say. And they looked at all the evidence. They gathered years and years and years of research on this and all the stuff that they could find on the websites of proponents of learning styles and where they did provide evidence. Actually, it's quite rare that they do actually provide peer-reviewed scientific evidence on this stuff. But they did a huge survey of the evidence. And as far as I'm aware, this hasn't changed in 2008. There's not been any other studies on this. All of the evidence they found was like this, i.e., there's a method of teaching that's better and it works no matter what classification the kids have been given. None of it was like this, which is there's a way of teaching kids that suits their learning style and only their learning style. And they concluded, Pashler et al. In 2008, if classification of students' learning styles has practical utility, it remains to be demonstrated. And as I say, as far as I'm aware, it still remains to be demonstrated. That any of these taxonomies where kids can fill in a little questionnaire or you send them to someone who tests what their learning style is and gets lots of money for doing it. None of these things actually have any practical utility for their learning. There are good ways of teaching, and those good ways of teaching are good for everyone, no matter what learning style they are. So the question is, a little bit like the question of class size, why is it that teachers absolutely love learning styles? Maybe we can chat about this in the Q&A, but I guess my explanation for it is that it's a nice thing, right? It's a nice thing to think that if you could just crack the child's particular way of learning, you could teach them a huge amount of stuff. If you could just find the particular way to tap into this kinesthetic brain with a kinesthetic method of teaching, the kid's gonna open up like a flower and learn loads of stuff and rise to the top of the class. That would be a lovely world to live in, wouldn't it? But sadly, it looks like the evidence is that that's not the case. And it's related to the idea, of course, of of multiple intelligences, which is another really common belief that a lot of teachers have, and again that's shown in surveys that majority of teachers would agree with the statement that there are multiple intelligences. Unfortunately, again, that's just completely contrary to all the evidence which shows that there is one general factor of intelligence. If you tend to be good at doing one kind of academic ability, you tend to be good at them all on average.
Isn't it more reassuring that there is one style of teaching that invariably works? And if you crack that, then you crack most of it?
A great point, although I guess a lot of teachers might not want to, they might be discouraged by the fact that that method of teaching, especially for early years, things like reading and maths, might just be drilling rote learning and making them learn how to spell words and do maths problems and things like that.
There's ways to make that, there must be ways to make that fun.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Could we get questions from the end though? That's okay. We all have a Q&A session.
Killjoy.
Sorry.
Okay, do learning styles exist? No. Right. Who's up for picking the next one? Yes. Teacher quality. Does teacher quality matter? Let's go to that. So again, this is another one that and this is twins again. I absolutely love twins. Any twins in the audience? There should statistically be. Yeah, I think there statistically should be some twins here. Anyway, it's a big issue in the media. This is talked about all the time. Here's someone in some website that I found a while ago. I can't remember what it was. America's teachers are sharing their low grades with America's children. So teachers that are not very well educated are having a detrimental effect on children's learning. Here's Michael Gove talking about performance-related pay. Now that's interesting because when I did this talk before, just putting that picture up, everyone started laughing. And this didn't happen in this audience. That's interesting. Okay. I wasn't trying to get a laugh. I'm just sociologically interested in that. Here's the Daily Mail. A huge rise in payoffs for bad teachers, use of golden goodbyes. So the argument there that they're making is that some teachers are bad, and this really matters, and it's a disgrace that bad teachers are getting paid money to disappear. I think generally we agree that this is a popular thing in the media that people talk about a lot. So how do you test whether teachers actually have much of an effect on kids' learning at all? There are lots of problems with just using. So what you could do is go to a school and you could just maybe test a bunch of teachers, whatever outcome of teacher skill you want to measure. Maybe you just want to measure how smart the teachers are. Maybe you want to measure how fast the kids progress when they're in the class with this particular teacher. Maybe that would be a measure of teacher quality. But the problem with doing that is that, well, there are issues with genetics, for instance. So kids develop at different rates, and that is to some extent under biological control. So it might be that some of the kids in the class look like they're advancing really quickly with one particular teacher, but actually that's just due to a developmental kind of growth spurt. It might be the case that home practices are interfering with this, or confounding our research, i.e. that some parents spend more time reading to their kids, they employ tutors to help their kids along, so you don't really know if it's actually the teacher that's doing it to the kids or if it's the parent. Socioeconomic status can be a problem. So, well, kind of a bit like the last one, rich parents will be able to afford extra tuition for their kids. There might be peer influences. Some kids might get in with very good peer groups that allow them to that kind of concentrate their minds on academic stuff. Some kids might get in with peers who do stuff like spend all the time, I don't know, drinking buckfasts. Yeah, okay, yeah. I didn't want to say it. But, yeah. Skateboarding. I don't know, whatever children do. Whatever children do these days that takes them away from their study. Can we do an experiment on this? Well, then this is one of these things where parents say, "Oh, you're not doing an experiment on my kids. You're not putting my kids in a class with a crap teacher and then randomly assigning them to either a crap teacher or a good teacher and seeing how their achievement goes." What you might do, for instance, is take teachers that have been trained in a particular college that is very prestigious, compared to teachers that are not, randomize kids to them and see whether that happens. Now, that has only happened once. That kind of study has only ever happened once, as far as I'm aware. And this is a disgrace, right? Why do people not want their kids to be experimented on? Actually, saying it like that. Anyway, this one study that was done in the US cost $12 million. It was I think it was California. It involved the whole state apparatus to change loads of stuff, to randomly assign kids to trained teachers and not so trained teachers, I think. And it was a hell of a task anyway to do this kind of experiment. And they found, on average, there were pretty small effects of teachers on children's, I think this is their reading ability in particular. However, the answer to all our questions is twins. So I'm going to go on about this until it sticks. Here's a paper from from Brian Byrne, who is at a university in Australia, which escapes me at the moment. But this is a paper in the Journal of Educational Psychology, where they used a sample of twins, some of whom were just by accident in the same class in the same school, and some of them were in a different class in the same school. So these are twins. If you think about the identical twins, these are twins who have all their biology in common, so their genetics are exactly the same. So theoretically they should have the same kind of growth spurts at the same times and all that sort of stuff. They should have the same levels of biological thinking ability, all that stuff. They are from the same families as well, so they're from the same socioeconomic status, all that, and they're in different classes. Some of them had the same teacher. Controls for all that stuff: genes, home environments. And so they hypothesized that if they found a higher correlation between the twins, so you look at twin A's reading, you look at twin B's reading, and you see how close they are together. So a higher correlation for twins that are in the same class than twins that are in the different class would imply that there's a teacher effect or a classroom effect, that there's something about being in that same class that raises both their reading to similar levels. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah? And that controls for all these problems. And what they found was that the overall teacher or classroom effect, so it's not necessarily a teacher, it might be something to do with the people in the class with them, whatever, was around about 8%. So 8% of the variance in reading ability was explained by being in the same class, by having the same teacher or the same class. Now, of course, a lot of the variance in reading ability is explained by genetics, so we shouldn't think that that is too small, but it is a lot smaller than people might originally think. So they said that the results were not consistent. Whereas the results were important and they showed that there was something going on there. It's not that this was 0% of the variance, but they were not consistent with the strong claims of classroom effects that are often seen in the popular press. And actually, they were consistent using this method with the experiment that I mentioned, the $12 million experiment they'd be done. So, I thought that was quite interesting. Here's another way you can use twins to look at what effects teachers have. So this is now looking at twins, identical twins compared to non-identical twins, and looking at genetic influences and how genetic influences change depending on the environment around you. Here's an interesting graph. This shows, so this is at the bottom here, this is a measure of teacher quality. And this is a gain. The ORF is a reading measure that they have in Florida, where these guys did their research. This was published in Science, by the way. None of your nonsense, ladies and gentlemen. One of the top journals. This is how fast the children advanced in reading, how much they gained across a year, I think. Either they gained a lot, or they didn't do very well, and that was their measure of teacher quality. So the teachers are either pushing them forward, holding them back, or actually making them get worse. And this is how much of the variance in their reading score can be explained by their genetics, by their common environment, by things that the twins shared, or by the non-shared environment, which is stuff that one twin experiences but the other doesn't. So maybe friends that one twin has, but whatever. And the interesting thing is this line here, which shows that if you're in a class with a better teacher, you have a higher genetic influence on your reading than if you're in a class with a shit teacher. Now, that's not the way they phrased it in the paper in Science. but the point is, what seems to be happening here is if you've got a good teacher, it seems that you can maximize your genetic potential for your reading in this particular case, although there are a few studies that have looked at this kind of thing for intelligence, though not necessarily with teachers. What they show is that kids in richer environments who are brought up by richer parents seem to have more of a genetic effect on their intelligence than kids who are brought up in low socioeconomic status in poor families. Now, that's been found in some studies and not found in others, so it's a bit of a controversial thing at the moment, and this is controversial as well, but it's interesting that this is what you can show. And it seems like having a bad teacher depresses your innate potential, and you get less of an innate genetic effect when you're reading. Isn't that cool? Aren't twins awesome? So, does teacher quality matter? Well, for reading at least. Now, of course, both of those studies I just mentioned are all focused on reading, so there are a lot of other things that teachers do. Obviously, I don't want to just focus on reading. I mean, it's something that I focus on in my research quite a lot, but we need to remember that there's more to life than reading. But anyway, the effects are small, but they're there, and we shouldn't expect high-quality teachers to make everyone equal. In fact, having a higher quality teacher might bring out your genetic variance in your reading. Equalizing the environments for everyone might mean that people who are just biologically endowed with a better potential will rise up to the top, and will find it more easy to rise up to the top. So when people talk about equalizing school outcomes, you're not going to make everyone the same. You're going to actually amplify the genetic differences that are there in the first place. Oh, that's the end. That's not the end, because there's more questions. How am I doing for time, Ian? No, that's the end. Back. There we go.
You've got 2 left on you.
Yep. Have I got enough?
15 minutes.
Okay, which one would you like to hear next? Which one? Genes, neuroscience? Oh,
Neuroscience.
you can't choose. Neuroscience. That sounds good. We've just had some genes, so let's have some neuroscience. Can neuroscience inform educational practice? This is a big thing. This is actually quite a brief one. This is a big thing that a lot of people are quite excited by. They're excited by the pictures of brain scans that you see in newspaper reports. And there's always the latest thing in the papers about researchers predict from just doing a brain scan what can be, what kids' potential is. Loads of things are getting neuro prefixes. So you've got neuromarketing. Neuro law, I've seen, neuroethics, neurocriminology. I'm actually a bit of a fan of neurocriminology. Anyway, neuroaesthetics, I've seen, neuroeconomics, and what we're interested in particular here, neuroeducation. Now, some cruel people have come up with a suffix that goes with the prefix neuro, but I think it's unfair to write off a lot of these things. So we should ask, what is the contribution that neuroscience and understanding of the brain might make to education? Here's 3 ways that I think neuroscience could potentially influence education. 1, it might inspire new classroom practice. So we might do a study where we learn something about how the brain is organized, and we might think, well, okay, we can target that particular way the brain works with an intervention in the classroom. Now, has anyone ever heard of anything like that? No. As far as I'm aware, there have been no interventions designed for classroom practice that have come specifically from a neuroscientific understanding. That is, without an understanding of the psychology, the mind level stuff that's going on. So one example that kind of comes to mind, I guess, is the idea of the mental number line. So it's been found recently that numbers are represented spatially in the brain, that there's actually areas of the brain for increasing magnitude. But of course, we knew that from looking at cognitive psychology studies. We knew that people seem to represent numbers in a line, almost like a physical line that they see. We knew that from just looking in a psychology lab without having to look into people's brains. So I'm not 100% certain. I think that might be the case in the future, that we might learn things about the brain and that might inspire some sort of new neuroscientific practice, new educational practice, but I'm a bit skeptical of it at the moment. Here's another one. This is neuroprognosis. Here's another paper in PNAS, or the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. This is one of the sort of top 3 journals, or it's a big journal anyway. And this is neural systems predicting long-term outcome in dyslexia. And what these people claim to have done is predict whether whether people would do better, whether dyslexic kids would do better than other dyslexic kids, just looking at what was going on in their brains. And they actually said that was a better prediction, just looking at various brain scans using functional magnetic resonance imaging and diffusion tensor imaging. That was a better predictor than actually getting the kids to sit down and do various reading tests of how they would do in their reading 2 years later. Now, that's very exciting. This just came out a couple of years ago. I think it was 2010, yeah. So it just came out a few years ago. This is in its very, very early stages. Now, the downsides to this are, of course, in this particular study, it's a very small sample. The reason for that is that this is extremely expensive to do. It's massively expensive to do any kind of research on that involves going in to do brain scans, especially when you have to follow the people up several years later and scan them again and give them tests again, all that sort of stuff. So it's extremely expensive to do. And that goes for using this in a practical context as well. So unless, and I suspect it will, unless the neuroimaging techniques become much more cheap in future, we might find that neuroprognosis is actually an unlikely thing for the time being. Another one is testing whether interventions you've done really work. That is, you do an intervention like send kids to music lessons, and you test them on. So you're interested in whether music lessons raise kids' IQ, right? Perfectly interesting question to ask. So I've seen a study that does this, that tests them at the start with intelligence tests, and then they do music lessons, and then they do intelligence tests again. But they didn't just do intelligence tests at both time points. They did EEG, which is measuring the electrical activity from electrodes on the scalp, the electrical activity of the brain. And they said that because there were differences in the EEG, that this showed that really, it was really the case that something was really going on. I think the IQ points, there were a few IQ points added for music lessons as well. Now, the interesting thing here is that I don't think this makes any sense. If you've got an intervention that raises IQ, that actually has a behavioral difference, that causes kids to behave better or improve their ability to do a test, then it doesn't matter whether you can show anything different in their brain, because they've actually changed in the way they behave, right? Conversely, if you show that there's a brain level difference, but there's no difference on a test, or there's no difference in any meaningful way outside of their brain, then the intervention is completely useless. So I'm not sure, this is kind of a growing thing now that these technologies are becoming more common. It's a growing thing to add in a brain measure, because you think maybe people will be more convinced if there's something that changes at the brain level that you can show. But I'm not at all convinced that this testing whether interventions really work idea that people talk about. So can neuroscience inform educational practice? Well, maybe, and I think the most plausible one there is this neuroprognosis idea, although it's going to take a while for this to happen, and especially for it to happen kind of commonly for every child. So, the last one. Which one do you want? Genes for educational success. What are the genes for educational success? Well, I recently saw a very fascinating paper in Science, which does a little bit of work answering this question. So we'll just we'll come to that in just a moment. There are two ways of getting at genetic contributions to behavior. There are two methods you can use. The first one is a quantitative genetic way, which is not actually looking at any of the DNA, but is looking at people's genetic relations. So all that twin stuff I've been talking about is quantitative genetics. So it's saying if two twins who are identical in their genes are more highly correlated than two twins who are the same in their genes, there's probably something genetic going on whatever trait you're measuring: intelligence, motivation, happiness, whatever it happens to be. Molecular, on the other hand, is actually taking a blood or a saliva sample and taking it to the lab and getting information on that person's DNA and trying to find out which specific genes are having an effect on the behavior. So twin and actually adoption studies as well versus DNA. So with adoption studies, you can see that there's something genetic if kids are more like their biological parents than their adoptive parents. A study in 2012, now there's been a lot of studies on this, but there's a study in 2012 which kind of underlined this, that there is a really high heritability of IQ. That is, there's a genetic effect on it. This is looking at twins, a huge sample of twins from England and Wales, I think. That the heritability, i.e. the percentage of the variance in IQ that can be explained by genetics, is about 70. So 70% of the variation in IQ is under genetic control. For educational performance, it's about 50%. That is, I think it was GCSE scores. So that seems to be about 50% heritable in this, at least in this paper. The other thing that they can do with these studies is look at their genetic correlations. So do some complex twin modeling mathematics and show that the same genes are contributing to both IQ and to educational achievement. And it turned out that they have about 90% genetic correlation. That is, the majority of the overlap between IQ and education is because of shared genes. So this is using the twin method. And this heritability estimate has actually been recently confirmed by new studies which have have taken twins out of the equation altogether. So a lot of people were quite skeptical of twin studies, wrongly I think, but and actually wrongly, as has been shown, has been confirmed. But a lot of people were quite skeptical, so people said, right, okay, we'll not even have any twins, right? We'll not have any twins, and we'll just have DNA. And so they took DNA and used this new method called GCTA, which estimates the heritability. Basically, looks at patterns of DNA differences and patterns of behavioural differences, so IQ differences, and to see what they have in common. And it turns out that the heritability of IQ is about the same as what you get out of twin studies from when you just look at the DNA. But the question is, what are the specific genes involved? Everyone always asks this when I say, oh, twin studies have shown there's a genetic effect on IQ. They say, yeah, but what genes are they? Firstly, you don't need to know that to know that there's a genetic effect, because you can use these quantitative methods. But secondly, yeah, it's pretty interesting. So here's a paper that came out, again, in Science. I'm not giving you, fringe research here, ladies and gentlemen. This was a genome-wide association study. So you're probably going to hear a lot more about GWAS studies in the next few years, because this is becoming a really big field of research, a really important method. And this is where you take as many people as you can possibly find for whom you have measured a particular thing. In this case, they measured how long they stayed in school, and genotype them all. Take a sample of their genome and run it through various microchips that record the DNA sequence variation. Here's this paper in Science. They managed to collect 126,559 individuals to identify the genetic variants associated with educational attainment. This is just a tiny sample of the authors of that paper. It goes on and on and on, because basically these people heroically found as many samples as they possibly could, that they had genes and education, put them together and use these complex statistical techniques to find out which of these genes are contributing to education. And they found that 3 single nucleotide polymorphisms, that is when one letter of the DNA is changed compared to other people, 3 of them, if you add them together, explain a massive 2% of the that's a joke, massive there, never mind. Explain 2% of the duration in education. That is, per SNP, per letter change in your DNA, you'd get about 1 month of college, university, they say. Now, this doesn't sound very impressive, but actually, this is a really interesting proof of concept, because essentially, mathematically, this shows that if you increase the sample size, that is, if you go out and collect another several 100,000 people who have all got genes and all got education measured, then you'll start to uncover more of these SNPs. This is a problem of statistical power. It's really hard to find these SNPs because they have such a tiny little effect, each of them, and thousands and thousands and thousands of these genes are going to be contributing to something as complex as education. What is actually being measured here? Are these SNPs involved in intelligence? Are they involved in paying attention? Are they involved in enjoying education? Are they involved in being motivated to stay in school for longer? Well, we don't know that. And I know that these guys are currently looking at what other things these SNPs might be associated with. So essentially, we don't know the answer to what the genes are specifically. We have 3 possible targets, but that's not very much, since we might be talking about thousands here. But we have made the first step, and this is getting published in some of the top journals. Now, one issue that you might come up with here, might think of, is, well, what about the ethical problems here? What about the ethics of doing studies that look at the genes involved in something like education, some social trait like education? Well, a popular blog called The Mermaid's Tale, I don't know if anyone reads it, said, looking for genes for education, or indeed for IQ. This is a blog which has a few angry comments from me under it. They said it was dangerously immoral. They said it takes the responsibility away from society. So if we understand the biology of educational differences, then why would anyone care about trying to improve society? Don't quite see the logic there. Maybe you do, I don't know. The disastrous lessons of the eugenics era, this is bringing back. And as the Germans learned in the 1930s, so these people are geneticists themselves, and they're really getting really upset about this kind of research. So I read this, and I don't know, I found this fascinating. And you can see that I had if you read this particular blog, I can send you if you're interested. I had a wee bit of a back and forth with the author of that particular thing. Anyway, that was just to acknowledge the fact that some people are made a little bit uncomfortable by talking about the biology of achievement and the biology of ability. I don't think we should be, because the intention behind a lot of these things is just to find out what the hell is going on in the brain that makes some people smarter than others, makes some people stay in education for longer. And also, in the future, once we discover what these genes are, we might be able to do a genetic test for kids who are going to develop things like learning disabilities, dyslexia, dyscalculia, and give them the help that they need. Now, this is way in the future, right? We're not talking about anything soon. But we are making the first steps right now. So what are the genes for educational success? Well, this is not me. We, in general, humanity, are working on it. But the very beginnings of progress are being made. And this is quite an exciting field, and I think it's going to ramp up pretty quick. Pretty soon. There's a film coming out soon, or it may even be out in kind of, the smaller cinemas. Like we have the Film House in Edinburgh. I don't know what you have in Glasgow, but it's called DNA Dreams, and it's about a Chinese company that are sequencing people with extremely high IQ, that are taking their entire genome and finding thousands of people with IQs of 130 to 150. It's really fascinating. You should watch it. It's really good. I just saw it the other day. See if you can track it down if you're at all interested in this. Anyway, yeah, so we're starting to make progress on this. Isn't that good? And I think that is it, isn't it? Yeah, so thank you very much for listening. Follow me on Twitter. You can ask me any questions that you have about the talk. And I believe we're going to have a break now and then have a Q&A. So thank you very much for listening. Cheers.